Good afternoon, everybody, and you're very, very welcome here with David Phillips on this, to this event, which is really a very, very important event for us as an industry. Looking at the circular economy, sustainability is really on everybody's agenda now, and it's coming to us from the very top, from the funders through the ESG process, and of course, consumers are expecting us to produce buildings and furniture and product that is increasingly green and has all those kind of credentials. And of course, what better place to have this, which is really one of the first built to rent buildings or communities in London, and in some ways a built to rent laboratory where we look to see how things progress and learn so much from the village here. So we're very, very glad to be here. But I suppose the question really is, what is the circular economy? Now, when I first started looking at sustainability matters, we used to just have a mantra, which was reduce, reuse, and recycle, the 3 R's. And I think that still holds true as a summary of the circular economy. But what really underpins it is a need to reduce carbon. And so once we've produced carbon to create something, whether it be a piece of furniture or a building, we should really try not to destroy that carbon and then have to replace it by producing something that requires more carbon. I mean, that is the very simplest version of this. And the way that then plays out is that we have to be, we sort of, from a design perspective, and my background is architecture, we have to look at the product, whether it be a building or a piece of furniture, and say, not just how do we get this out and produced and how do we use it, but now we absolutely have to work out how we dispose of it or reuse it. So that's really a very, very simple version of the circular economy. And I will hand over to Tom to take it from here.
Okay, thanks very much. Well, first of all, I'm just going to go around the panel and get everyone to introduce themselves and just tell you what they do. So we'll start from the end with Andy.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Andy Schmidt. I am one of the co-founders and chief community officer at a company called Seismic. We are a consultancy that helps organizations understand and improve their impact on people and planet. And our team has the great fortune of working with a number of wonderful organizations and brands like Patagonia, Pucka Teas, JLL, David Phillips. And in my role as Chief Community Officer, I'm oftentimes trying to bring together our clients and our partners in order to share experiences and help each other learn, share knowledge, ideally collaborate in order to accelerate sustainability. And so I'm just very thankful to Get Living UKAA and David Phillips for having us here this evening.
Thank you. Brendan?
So Brendan Geraghty, Chief Executive of the UKAA. We are the authority on build to rent, representing the entire industry. And what's important about the UKAA is that it is a very broad church. We have investors and lenders at the one end. We have developers. We have a host of consultants and designers who help us produce stuff. And we have contractors, and we have operators and suppliers. And it's a very, very, what the UKAA seeks to do is to be relevant and to all of those pockets of membership and produce and do things which allow them to become unified, but also talk to their particular needs. So we're very, very pleased to be part of this today. And certainly, if you need any information about the UKAA, please just let me know.
Brilliant. Jackie.
Hi there, I'm Jackie Robinson. I'm the director of East Village. I look after this laboratory. My responsibilities include the resident experience, the operation, and the commercial performance of East Village. For those of you that don't know much about East Village, it's been around for 10 years now, part of the Olympic legacy. We have just short of 2,500 homes here. Thousands of which are new developments that have been built since 2019. One quite recently that was launched only recently in August, Portland's Place, which is just across the park. And lots of developments still to go in the East Village pipeline. So really pleased to be here today.
Fantastic, thank you. Hannah.
Thank you. I'm Hannah. I'm one of the co-founders of HomeViews. HomeViews is the residential review platform. So we invite residents, whether they be owners, tenants, shared owners, across all kinds of housing and new build, to write reviews about what it's like to live in their homes. We actually have a lot of build-to-rent developments on HomeViews. We cover almost 90% now of completed build-to-rent developments. And one of the questions that we actually ask residents is around sustainability. So I'm looking forward to sort of sharing some of the resident perspective.
Nick?
Hello, I'm Nick Gill. I'm the CEO of David Phillips, one of the sponsors of the event. We have been involved with Get Living for 9 years. We were fortunate enough to furnish the original Olympic fit out back in 2014-15, and more recently working with Jackie and John and the team here on the refresh program, which has seen a rolling refresh of up to, we're heading our way towards 1,400 apartments. And out of that came the release take-back program, which we started a couple of years ago together with Get Living.
And last, John.
Hello, so I'm John Inglis, and my role with Get Living is Head of Net Zero. So I look at the impacts of climate change on Get Living as a business, which includes your kind of physical impacts, such as extreme heats that we've seen recently, but also looking at transitional risks like regulation and changes to technology and to consumer sentiments, which we can see coming down the line.
Thanks very much. Right, so to kick us off on this discussion, the first question I'm going to ask is about when sustainability first became a feature on your professional radar. I mean, everyone's talking about it nowadays, but I think it'd just be interesting to find out when it became part of your career. I think I want to start with you, Andy.
Thanks, Tom. For myself, my career did not start in sustainability. I wish when I was younger there were these career paths, but they weren't at the time. I actually was doing an MBA at the time when there was a class, I think it was on ethics and leadership, and I started to see some of the data around these businesses that were leveraging their unique resources in order to contribute to social and environmental challenges, and that they were actually growing very well, very resilient, and highly profitable. And that was probably about 12, 13 years ago or so. And it was just, it convinced me that companies that put people and planet alongside profit are actually going to be the most profitable. And so I became convinced that impact, environmental and social, are some of the best investments that a business can make. And interestingly, back then, I think I remember within those classes and some of my early colleagues, we were all passing around kind of the same few articles and data sets, and just to see how far it's come. The data is there. The business case, in my perspective and from my team's perspective, it's clear the companies that measure and monitor and improve social and environmental performance are going to be ones that thrive in the months and years ahead.
Okay, thanks very much. And I promise you, I'm not just going down the line, but I am actually going to ask Brendan next.
So I first became aware of sustainability or the creeping issue of sustainability as a student of architecture. I read a book called The Turning Point by Fritjof Capra, which talked about moving away from the sort of the things that underpin modern architecture, all the tenets of modern architecture and the aesthetic sort of values that influence us so much today. And it was in that space that I started to look at alternatives and be aware that there are limited resources. And of course, coming from South Africa, where I then practiced after being graduating here in London, we often had to do buildings in faraway places where there were no materials that you could really build from. You had to use found materials, and you had to really look at circular economy issues as an absolute imperative to the design and the development process. But more latterly, I think in terms of it's becoming as a global issue, I was very fortunate to go to what is now the Cambridge Institute of Sustainable Leadership or something like that, and do one of their courses, which really launched me into the world of sustainability and ESG. Really, that was the genesis of the sort of, not them, but the genesis of ESG was being developed then. And we launched a practice, Geraghty Taylor, which I was a part of for a very long time, as a green practice. And when you went around to our clients, they all, and to anybody, they all accused us of knitting our own muesli. I mean, it was so far away from the reality of what they were thinking. So that was in early 2000s. But what I'm very pleased about is that, really since the 2000s, there has been a steady march. And what's really important now is that it's been demanded by big money, the big pension funds, the institutional investors. But what's even more encouraging is to see companies really take a leadership position, and there are many of them. But David Phillips, I think, is really needs to be commended for taking that position and moving the agenda forward, having the debates, and really being out there doing more than they need to.
I mean, that actually brings me on to asking Nick then about when sustainability came onto the David Phillips radar.
Yeah, I think there's been a drive over the last several years. So if we look at, say, the mid 2010s, 15, 16, 17, but if I'm being completely honest, it was still a one-way. For us as a seller and renter of furniture, it was still a one-way journey, really. We sell furniture to our customers. We hope that the phone rings at some point in the future and we get to sell more furniture to those customers. We've always had a recycling element to what we do, because a large part of it is, in order to sell new furniture, please come and take the old furniture away, but nothing really at scale. So there was no compounding requirement. I think, and just sort of thinking about this event, possibly had foresight of some of the questions. I think 2018 was Extinction Rebellion. 2019 was Greta Thunberg. I think those two things genuinely just started to change the debate. And then actually at the end of 2019, we received the tender from Get Living to put a proposal together for the refresh of the apartments here. And then when you start to think about the scale of what was required, at that time, the tender was for the original Olympic apartments, so 1,400 apartments. That's 30,000 pieces of furniture, plus or minus. Okay, that's not an apartment at a time. An apartment at a time is kind of manageable. You can do something with that. But all of a sudden, 30,000 pieces of furniture. Actually, we cannot, for lots of different reasons, financial but ethical reasons, you just cannot put that into landfill. Leave aside the physical cost of it, and landfill, thankfully, is becoming more and more expensive. But we've got to find a better solution from that. So I would say it was really a combination of things. There was the zeitgeist, this sort of general societal move around about 2019, and then big customer, as you say, Brendan, something of a laboratory, suddenly said, actually, please find us a solution. And interestingly, then, of course, we went straight into pandemic. And I think far be it from me to talk about how that affected residents, but I think with people spending a lot more time at their homes, that focus on wellness, which has suddenly emerged as being a significant driver, now it's everything, really, in many ways. And I think our customers increasingly are demanding a whole life solution and just a better way of doing things than was the case a couple of years ago.
And in terms of customers, Hannah, what's been the sort of impact or the effect of a drive towards sustainability in terms of what you're seeing from the feedback from customers?
I think we've always been interested in sustainability as a topic, and the first time we did a build to rent report, we actually looked for mentions of sustainability from residents and actually found very little. There wasn't much sort of proactive review writing linked to sustainability. It was more linked to the impact of sustainability, in the sense that they were talking about overheating in flats or insulation, or how this affects my bills. And it was not so much in the words of eco. We've definitely seen an increase in people actually talking about it. But we decided in February 2021 to introduce a new question onto HomeViews and actually ask residents if sustainable features in their property was important to them, and what features they'd look for in their sort of next home, what matters to them. So we're starting to take some steps to sort of start to understand the value. The $1 million question, and before anyone asks it to me, is what people would pay for, and that is the $1 million question. And we could ask them, they'd probably lie. So until you actually put your money there, I can't give you a final answer on what they'd actually pay for. So I'll finish that one before it starts. But I think what we've seen is that increasing mentions, and it does relate to very visible things. It relates to recycling, and that has been the number one feature that residents say is most important to them is something very tangible. It's recycling. And I think what we've seen and what we all know has the biggest impacts from a sustainable point of view in terms of construction methods or, kind of carbon neutral, anything down that route. Residents have a lack of understanding about it, and it doesn't come through in the reviews. It very much comes down to recycling and renewable energy.
Right, okay. I think looking at the circular economy specifically in this panel, how does the circular economy feature for your clients here at East Village?
Well, we'll talk much later, I'm sure, about the refresh programme in a bit more detail, but clearly that had a huge effect on our residents insofar as how we approach that and making sure that when we started that refresh programme we're over 1,000 homes now, that actually the environmental considerations was very much part of what we did right from the beginning. So first question is, what happens to all these mattresses, over to Nick. That's really, really, really important. But I do think there is we have an obligation and to inform and educate our residents and provide a community that actually increases the awareness of sustainability across the village here. You're all sat in the building, the E20 lab, which we opened in the middle of COVID actually, but this was launched by a gentleman called Christopher Rayburn, who is a designer with his ethos around positive fashion and reusable fabrics. And you can see all the parachutes around you, which is testament to what he does. So I'm making his clothing in those parachutes. But we also host many events in this building and across the village where we're always promoting sustainable living. So we have companies in here like Loanhood who rent clothing and accessories on an app. We have a company called Dot that we've highlighted here and showcased to swap children's clothing. And the many more examples. We've got D-Lab that actually puts summer schools on here for aspiring local architects and designers, which is always really well attended, but it's all around promoting sort of local people to get into this industry. So, this was, we are a commercial business at the end of the day, and we've used a building that actually we could have got a really great commercial return on to actually use it to promote sustainable living and a positive fashion across the village. And it's worked really, really well for us. And I do believe that some of the results that Hannah is talking about with regards to awareness of sustainability has certainly been driven from some of the activities that we have done across East Village. It's not just also about the homes, it's about the retail and the retailers that you choose to come and be here at East Village. So we have Refill Therapy, which is for want of a better word, grocers that actually don't believe in single-use plastics, and therefore they use refill and reuse as part of their ethos. So, many examples of where we are living and breathing sustainability across East Village.
Fantastic, thanks very much. On a change of sort of subject on the same sector economy, Brendan, how about yourself?
I think as an architect, we are concerned with creating the buildings. And there's two issues here. How does the building perform, and then how do we perform in the building? And I think that whilst the two are very, very closely linked, very often the requirements of the performance requirements of a building are set through regulations and other things. Increasingly, badges like BREEAM and Passive House are setting that standard. But the building can do so much, and we must recognize that whilst we've worked very hard to reduce carbon in buildings, a net zero carbon building, we only figured out how to do that about 2 weeks ago. None of those buildings have been built, and they won't be built for probably 5 years or so. So we've got to recognize where we are. For the construction industry or construction produce about 40% of the UK's carbon emissions. That's the whole of construction, and homes in all their guises are about 50% of that carbon. So we have a lot to do in our sector to just on the building and the building fabrics. So I think we need to recognize where we are, recognize we've made really good progress, though, in terms of reducing carbon. But in terms of net zero carbon in use, it's going to be, we're not there yet. We're on the way. Embodied carbon, which is the next challenge, and that's even more complex, is really what's going to get us to 2050. So there's different scales of this, but what's important is that we start somewhere, and we start with how we occupy our buildings as much as the building themselves, and how we use the space within that. And I was incredibly encouraged talking to Nick earlier that there is a chain of custody dimension to what David Phillips do in terms of that embodied carbon in the products that they produce. So the circular economy has got small scale and very, very big scale implications, but as long as we're moving in the right direction, I think we'll be fine. We will get there.
Anyone else have any comments on the circular economy within their particular field?
I'll just say, you know, we have two types of customers. We have the residents and the retailers, and then we have the investors who are entrusting, you know, their pensions and their savings with us. And I think the investor demand for sustainability and innovation and, you know, really robust supply chains, that's probably the customer that's driving it more from my particular point of view.
Okay, well, that brings me neatly on to asking.
Maybe Tom, just to add on that, excuse me. I saw a stat recently from Edelman PR, which is one of the world's largest public relations corporate communications firm. They do an annual survey. It's very robust. It's been around for a number of years, about the views of different stakeholders on the roles of government and business. And one stat that caught me out of their most recent report, speaking to your point, which is, I think, quite fascinating, and I don't have the data to compare how it shifted over time, but 88% of institutional investors are looking to scrutinize ESG similarly to how they do operational and financial performance. And I think that's what I'm spending a lot of my time working with or speaking with private equity companies and venture capitalist firms, which if you would have asked me a couple of years ago if that's how I was going to spend a good chunk of my time, I would have been willing to bet you a pint that I wouldn't be. But it's because they're getting that from who they're fundraising with. And that's just an amazing shift that is, I think, snowballing everything else.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. So can I ask John and Jackie about the refresh program here at East Village and how sustainability and the circular economy have formed part of that? I know we've covered bits of that.
Shall I? Well, basically, we had a unique challenge, which was how do you refresh, 1,400 apartments that have been really well lived in for 8 or so years. And I think that the default approach would have been, well, we'll strip everything back. We'll take out all of the flooring. We'll take out the kitchens. We'll take out the bathrooms, and we'll have a clean slate, and we'll go in and put in everything shiny and new. And from a project management point of view, it would have been quite easy because you would have known you're doing the same thing each time, and it's nice and predictable. But it would have been a massive waste of, what are frankly quite precious resources. And it would have been a waste of housing that would have been out of action for months on end. And it would have been a waste of investors' capital. So what we did is we came up with a shopping list of things that might need to be done, which could just be a deep clean and regrouting and redoing all the sealant in the bath and the kitchens. It could be replacing a few drawers and frontals in the kitchens, or it could be actually let's strip out all of the flooring as well. But the idea was we would go in and try to do the least that we could. And that meant setting up a different relationship with the contractor. So it meant spending more time on the management side of things and dealing with more uncertainty. But the end result was actually it was very efficient. We turned around homes very quickly. We addressed all the important things. They look fantastic. They're letting very well. And I think we inadvertently kind of stumbled into the circular economy for good old-fashioned linear economic reasons. We didn't want to do the default linear thing. And the things that we just had to bite the bullet and say, okay, we do want new here. That was the furniture. So we went, okay, well, how can we do that well? You know, how can we get the best out of the new furniture, and how can we avoid just having this kind of cradle to grave approach on everything that we are taking out?
And that brings me neatly on to asking Nick if you can talk a little bit about how release has then come about.
Yes, so picking that up, as mentioned before, 30,000 pieces of furniture here. Requirement from Get Living and a necessity was to find some way of handling that. So we came up with a program which we've branded subsequently Release, which is our take back program, aimed initially at the build to rent world, because as Jackie was saying earlier, scale is really important. You need some scale to be able to do things properly. So we developed a program methodology with Get Living, which was to go to a property, pick up all the furniture, take it back to our depot, which conveniently is not very far away. It's about a 20-minute drive. Grade it at that point. So broadly speaking, put the furniture into one of three categories. That furniture which has reached the end of a commercial life, the furniture which is in good condition and with some TLC can actually come back to the village and take its place rightfully next to brand new furniture, or we could curate a package of pre-used furniture which was literally as good as new, and then the mid-tier. So I'll come back to the mid-tier in a minute. That which had reached the end of its commercial life, we have formed a relationship with a number of charities, and we donate that furniture to those charities. One of the things that's quite interesting is we're required to produce data for Get Living every month. And actually that was great from the get-go, because it required us to catalogue everything, be accurate with stuff, make data really important. So I can tell you that as of the end of end of August, updated date, that's right, 15,599 pieces of furniture have been removed from the village. Of that, about 3,500 items have been recycled. In the genuine sense, those are mattresses. So they've just gone off to be ripped into component parts, which is broadly textile and metal. We have put back into the village about 2,000 pieces of furniture. So those have been cleaned, refurbished, repaired, and put back into the village. That's saved about £350,000, something like that, for our client, and has also, frankly, reduced consumption. Commercially, it's not great for us, because that's, you know, those are 2,000 items of furniture that we would otherwise have sold, but that's the price in some ways of being, being sustainable. And then we have we've about 8,500, 9,000 items have gone to charity, and we have a range of charities. Some are very local, so they're East London based. Some, to be honest, are more nationwide, because there is a huge demand for furniture in lots of different categories. If you search for furniture poverty, you'll discover it's a real thing, and charities are just unbelievably grateful to have the opportunity to get great furniture, which has just come out of a commercial environment. All the furniture that you're sitting on today is part of that program. Some of it, particularly the stuff in the front row, has probably seen better days, and that would go off to charities. There's a sort of sofa down the way there, which is a nice blue button-back sofa that's probably about 7 or 8 years old. It's in great condition. So the condition varies hugely. And then the middle piece is where is the interesting piece that we have now digitized. So we've photographed it all. We've put it on the web. We've launched a program called Release, and we are selling that now to the general public. Our business is selling to landlords, investors, property managers of all different shapes and sizes. And for a large swathe of those customers, actually some pre-loved furniture, which is in pretty good nick. Yes, it's not perfect, but if I understand what I'm getting before I get it, so I understand that bedside, okay, it's got a scratch on the top, but otherwise it's in great condition. I'm paying £34 plus VAT for otherwise, for a product that would have paid £100 for. That's actually just fine. And there's probably a little tick in the box there, which is I'm doing a better thing. I'm reducing consumption by doing that. So that's where we are with the release program at the moment. We're talking to a number of other operators about providing that service as their apartments are coming out for refresh. One of the interesting things about Get Living is they're sort of a couple of years ahead of some of the others. But with the growth of the build-to-rent sector, obviously it's just going to be a growing challenge. And we now, when we put a proposal together to operators, we include the take back as an integral part of what we do. So essentially, we undertake that if you buy furniture from us in 2022, 2023, in 2028-9, we'll take it back from you. We'll put it into this program. And you have then a whole life solution, which you can be confident of. It's robust. We have data. We've done it before. It's not, to use words, it's not greenwashing. It's a real thing.
Thanks very much. That's good. Okay, so where do we see sustainability and the circular economy conversation moving to next in terms of BTR and operational real estate in general? Does anyone have?
I'm happy to take a maybe outside in approach first, and then maybe come into BTR. I think just what we see generally is that there is as that Edelman report pointed to, increased expectation around how businesses are performing around environmental performance, ESG in general, environmental in particular, and that with that comes an increased level of scrutiny. And so maybe taking some examples from other industries, I think, if you look at fashion, and particularly fast fashion, it has gotten a reputation, and it is having impacts on the businesses that are in there. And awareness is growing, and there's change happening, but one could argue maybe not happening fast enough. And so I think it'd be an interesting question I might have is to the BTR industry, are you prepared for that scrutiny when and if it comes? I think what we expect is that every industry is going to have its moment when the light is shined on them and they're asked, what are you doing? Are you doing enough? Are you doing it fast enough? And so what frameworks can you use? How can you as organizations help to keep ahead of that curve and be ready for when that moment comes? I think that's definitely what we're seeing, and maybe I'll come back to maybe a little bit later if it's useful on some ways that some of those frameworks that organizations can use to stay ahead of the curve.
So I think I'd add, so I think development is going to lead into operation increasingly. So we're starting to use whole life cycle assessment during the development phase to say, what's the performance and what are the emissions over the whole lifetime of a building. And at the moment, most of the good data is all in that upfront carbon, and we tend to get a bit of an estimate about the actual in use. So things like maintenance, repair, and replacements. So I'm kind of optimistic that a lot of the thinking that we're going to see in new construction around providing environmental performance declarations and providing data and saying how we actually think buildings and resources are going to be used, I'm hoping that's going to trickle through to operation as well.
Before HomeViews, my career was a little varied. I worked in pharmaceuticals. I have to say, sustainability wasn't something we ever really talked about in pharmaceuticals. But then I worked in the beauty industry, and we launched a beauty brand, which is sort of high-end, niche British brand. And one of the things that we did was really looked at sustainability as a core part of that brand and that message. And I think that something that we sort of have touched on is around brand loyalty and around the expectation on, especially build to rent, when people are buying into a brand. What we found in the beauty sector was that we had sustainable ingredients that cost us more, our cost of goods were higher. and we couldn't pass that on in the end price, because people weren't expecting to have to pay for that. They expected they were buying into a brand that was doing the right thing. And I think there's still a lot that we see on HomeViews in reviews across all types of topics, where they actually expect that the brand that they are renting with and they're living with are doing the right thing, that they're doing the due diligence on their supply chain, that they are thinking about these kind of programs that David Phillips has been doing with Get Living, that there's an expectation that they're going to have instantaneous Wi-Fi. There's an expectation on the service, and I think that goes through into sustainability. So I think it was interesting, the point that you made earlier, John, about the pressure comes from the investors at the moment. It's not coming from the residents. Will that come? I think it will. Whether or not they'll pay for it is still the big question we come back to. But I think that growing expectation that you do the right things, and that they're not necessarily having to pay for it, but what you'll get from them is loyalty, because they're buying into a brand that sort of communicates and reflects their values.
Okay, so what next? What are the next initiative? What focuses have you got next in terms of sustainability?
Tom, can I just add a little to what's been said regarding doing the right thing rather than the most commercial thing, and that is a really bold decision that any business can take. And I've spanned many industries, a bit like Hannah, and it's only in the last couple of years where we really talked where sustainability is very much at the top of the agenda and not somewhere down at the bottom, and where actually it's not something we just talk about, we actually do something with it. But if the culture within your business doesn't talk about it all the time and doesn't make sure that the teams on the ground are completely aligned with what you're trying to achieve, then you might as well not do it. And in Get Living, we've worked really hard on that. And for example, every single person that joins Get Living goes through, as part of their induction, a workshop with John here, who helps educate them on what Get Living is doing and more around why it is important to be sustainable. And every single member of our team have in their objectives something around sustainability, and it actually might be very small, like stop using coffee cups and use reusable cups. And for some people, it might be much more than that, but actually, it just gets people thinking. And I just wanted to add that I just think don't forget the people around you and making sure that they feel very much part of this.
I think there's always kind of a temptation to see sustainability or circular economy as something other. It's not part of the business. And when I'm kind of doing these workshops with people, I'm always saying, don't add anything. Don't add a new work stream. You have to look at what you're already doing and think about how you think it really should be done. I like to emphasize the economy part of circular economy. It's not about going out of your way to do something. It's about how can the system as a whole drive certain behavior, and how can it make sense for every cog in the wheel, every stakeholder, every partner to behave in a certain way.
I mean, just to pick up on that point, I think what we need to recognize here is that build to rent is a pioneering niche sector. It's only worth about 9.5 billion now, but it's destined to be worth about 550 billion pounds. That's pretty chunky, and it's growing and it's developing very quickly, and it's pioneering new ways of living all of the time. It's making rental living far more acceptable than perhaps it was culturally beforehand. And residential real estate has generally been characterized as a B2B dynamic. It hasn't really gone B2C. But build to rent has ushered in consumer culture into residential real estate for the very, very first time. It's completely devoid of brands. I mean, the brand point is extremely well made. I came up with the concept for build to rent when I was working as an architect, which is brand before building. Understand what your value proposition is and the values in your proposition, which should and could include sustainability, and sell that, not sell the product. And residential sales is really about selling the product. There's some lifestyle stuff when the marketeers get their hands on it, for sure. But really, it's about selling a product, whereas we're selling a way. We really are selling more of a way of life that is much more integrated and embedded. So, what is the future of this? The future really is what we're seeing right here today: is new initiatives around measuring data. If we're gonna keep our funders happy, they want to see data. And for most funders, 5-year-old data is beginning to get interesting. Anything less than that is a bit kind of, yeah, whatever. But what we need to do is recognize that it's not a tick box exercise anymore. You can buy some badges like BREEAM, but what we will be forced to do, particularly in the S and the G of the ESG dynamic, is create bespoke objectives that we pursue as individual businesses. And so I think you should be applauded for at the East Village for saying, okay, we're gonna figure this out and we're gonna measure it, and then we can measure it year on year, because it's the year on year improvement that shows the advancement in ESG, and it's the year on year improvement that the funders will be looking for. I'm not saying carbon is easy, it's just the most mature. And S and the G need to be attended to as well. But the construction industry, in terms of change of custody, we've done it. We did it with FSC timber. Nobody will use anything but FSC timber now. But when I started as an architect, that was a battle. And now it's absolutely the norm. So we've done it before, and we can do it again with carbon. And it's from within our industry. We don't have to go outside of the industry. But but just to finish on what's going to happen in build to rent land, the operators are going to start influencing the development process more and more and more. And investors cannot outsource their product definition or their product performance altogether, which is what has been a lot of the dynamic. They have to take responsibility, say, we want it to perform in this way, in these conditions, and with these human behaviors. And as long as you design that into the process and build that, Mr. Contractor, we'll be happy. So there's a process of redefining the development brief with the investors through a lot of different processes, but ultimately around life cycle and ESG, saying we wanted to do these things. And that's a very, very new area. But build to rent is probably going to pioneer those sort of solutions, as well as bringing in things like offsite construction and a whole myriad of other things. What we really are doing is bringing new thing to the industry. And I think we should recognize that we're doing that, even though we may feel challenged about how we're dealing with carbon, we're still knocking the socks off a lot of other sectors.
Thank you. And Nick, can I just ask what David Phillips is doing next in terms of initiatives?
Yes, I'll be quicker this time, I promise. Two things. So we are working with a European software company, which is a carbon management company. We're really excited about this, because as I think Andy was saying, that carbon is the next challenge. So we are aiming to produce data around the embodied carbon in each piece of furniture that we sell. We have a piece of bespoke software, which is a procurement, asset tagging, and inventory management software tool. And we want to put the carbon data into the inventory management piece, so that ultimately Get Living or Quintain buy 500 units of furniture, let's call it 500 sofas. We're able to tell them how much carbon they are taking into their estate. With a operational life set against that, then we can calculate, and they have access to the data on there, not just the embodied carbon, but the operating carbon emissions. And that's the next thing for us. That's really quite difficult. It's surprisingly difficult. The last reliable data was produced about 11 years ago, interestingly, in the furniture sector. So it's a bit of a mountain to climb, but I think we're making some progress on that. So that's the next thing for us. And then the rollout of release as well, and hopefully bringing more operators of scale on board, because that would really, I think, put some momentum behind it across the sector as a whole.
Yeah, I think creating a marketplace for the reused furniture, where it can, you've got to create a marketplace for people to want to use it. No one was reusing office furniture because there was nowhere you could find secondhand office furniture. It just got binned. And I think with this, it's you only get secondhand furniture from charity shops, but this is trying to create a larger market than that. Right. I think time-wise, I'm going to look to move at this point to see if there's any questions people have in the audience.
And I was just wondering if the panel have any opinions or comments on the B Corp accreditation with regards to sustainability.
I'm happy to kick that one off. It is one of the key frameworks that we help organizations with. There's hundreds of frameworks out there that help companies on ESG, and they all have pros and cons. I think we are strong believers around the comprehensiveness, the holistic approach of B Corp, as well as its practicality. I think because of those reasons, it's one of the most widely used frameworks out there. It's used by over 200,000 organizations around the world. If you perform at a high enough level, you can choose to have your assessment, your social environmental performance validated by a nonprofit and standards body, which is about 5,500 of those organizations that have done that. But it is, from our perspective, to Brendan's point, it's not just about measuring the E, it's also the S and the G. And the B Corp framework is in our opinion and our experience, one of the best options out there for organizations. I've spoken with a number of organizations on panels like this, companies we've helped and others. It's a good amount of work. I think it's important to recognize that. But I've seen every bit of feedback that I've seen from organizations that go through the process and use it in a ongoing way to understand and improve their impact. They all say it's very much worth it. Absolutely. Anybody from the panel have any experience with B Corp they'd like to share?
We're working with Seismic at the moment on B Corp accreditation. Actually, to John, to your point, I think one of the things that's really interesting for us is in the B Corp framework, employees are called workers, which amuses me hugely because it's such an old-fashioned word. But actually, I think that's one of the things that's most captivating about it is the ability to concretely demonstrate to the people that work in your business that this stuff is important to you. It is a piece of work. That's why it's worthwhile. So we're actively pursuing B Corp as a way for us to go as a company.
I won't harp on about B Corp for too long, but on the people side of things, agree workers is not maybe the best term there. We've seen an interesting trend of individuals who have spent a number of years working for a B Corp, and it's time for a change. They're looking for a new role at a new job, a new organization, and they're saying, I'm only looking at B Corps. I only plan on working for B Corps. And these are people with early in their career to mid-career to C-suite. And that experience of being a part of a B Corp, of making it tangible, helping an organization improve on the E and the S and the G, there's something about it. And people are planning to only work for B Corps for the rest of their career. And when that trend continues, B Corps win.
And do business with other B Corps.
Absolutely. B Corps love to do business with other B Corps. It's a values alignment. You know they've gone through a similar experience and process and hold themselves to a high bar.
Thank you. Other questions?
I'm Leanne from Jonathan Co. My question is around outside space. So when I look around London, there's a lot of balconies that add up all that outside space, and there's probably hectares of land. We've talked a lot about furniture inside. I guess my question was, what is the importance or the focus that you look on the actual outside balconies? You take on properties, the balconies are completely empty. So where is the opportunity there for sustainability? My question is.
This is your favourite new topic.
Yeah. So if you come to our conference on the 15th of November, we're gonna be putting on a big display of urban agriculture. So I mean, balconies are really, really important. Built to rent is about scale. I mean, they're big buildings, and psychologically, the further we're away from the ground, the more it impacts us. So there is as much as you all like big buildings, or certainly I do, there's a design flaw in that. Although they're very necessary in terms of density and that sort of thing. Now, access to the natural world is incredibly important, and it's one of the ways that we can ground ourselves, even if we are on the 21st or the 40th floor, is having real life in our apartments and on our balconies. Sadly, a lot of time this stuff gets value engineered out. I've designed many balconies that included planting beds and all the rest of it, but help us on the way with an Australian product called Veggie Pod, which can be put on. It's like a pop-up, and you can put it on balconies. It doesn't have to form part of the kind of capex, if you like, processes and all the rest of it. But the important point here is that balconies, before COVID, there was a movement and it almost succeeded of reducing balcony space because everybody was complaining that, or the planners and some architects were complaining that it sort of cluttered the elevation. I've always held that we experience our buildings on the inside rather than on the outside. And getting the internal and interior environment really, really good is what makes a place worth living in. And that includes the balcony. Thankfully, COVID came along because now you will have to have private external space. And I think that what we will see is that private external space really being invested in because we won't have a choice but to have them there. Luckily in East Village, I think most everybody does have one, but it's a really important point. And it can be the difference for the occupant between a really, really good experience and just a mediocre one.
Well, I just kind of add on our more recent developments with specifically provided balcony furniture because we want people to use their balconies and kind of in response to it can clutter the elevations. Actually, if you've got a 6, 7, 8-story building and all the balcony furniture matches, it actually looks really good. It's something that you can get from a built-to-rent neighbourhood that you just won't get anywhere else.
The other thing that's quite important is that on the back of that, you can make sure that you're taking into consideration building safety at the same time because you are choosing that product that is going on that balcony, and therefore you could make sure that it is safe to use. So win-win all around.
We actually found through data that buildings with balconies got higher ratings. It's one of the most popular design features that gets mentioned, and actually going to sort of Brendan's point about sort of tall buildings, when we looked at we did a collaboration with Mike Frank looking at the tall buildings report they do with LA, and buildings over 20 stories we actually found were more highly rated on HomeViews in London. So people liked the view, the elevation, the additional space that they often got with that.
Thank you. Other questions, anyone?
Okay, I was just saying how impressed I was by you'll sort me out later, right? With the stats, I mean, blown away by them, honestly. And again, I haven't been to one of these circular economy talks before. I haven't really paid too much attention to it, but it's got my attention now massively. Absolutely, hugely impressed. But for me, obviously, we're going to be approaching this stage in our life cycle soon. And the challenge I'm thinking is, how do you manage to do that different level of refresh, whether it's just silicing the bathtubs or whatever, through to removing the floor, then the furniture as well. How do you do that in occupied apartments? Maybe that's something we take offline, but that is
no. It's really topical actually, because we've done we're just approaching our 1000th refreshed home. So and we've been doing that over a long period of time. So we're approaching we're probably over 2.5 years now since we've been doing that. So we've been doing that during periods of void between tenancies. And the big challenge for us throughout this process is how do you tighten that window? And it's a bit like we were talking about earlier about doing the right thing, is that we have compromised on void time to be able to refresh these homes. Clearly, there is some commercial benefit as well, because actually the home is much more attractive. But we have worked very, very hard in turning it around quickly. And we're about at 2 weeks now to be able to refresh a home, because we've got it going a bit like a military operation, and we have to. That said, we are more than 2/3 now through our 1,439 homes. So that challenge of how do we do occupied homes is something that we are busy scratching our heads over at the moment. We've got some thoughts around that, about relocating people temporary. How do you compensate for that? ? Or do you not, because they're getting everything refreshed? How do you move people's furniture out? Who's responsible for that? Who ensures that? So that is the next challenge, because we still have homes that we need to refresh, and the homes that are coming up and available to do are becoming less and less as time goes on. So answers on a postcard.
Well, that makes sense, and I suppose you are the first in the industry to be doing this, so all the eyes are on you, right? So I'm going to learn a lot from you, hopefully. The other one was you talked about next generations. You know, they really will expect us to do the right thing. Brendan, what you were saying as well earlier. My daughter now, if I throw the wrong packaging away in the wrong bin, I'm dead. You know, she absolutely does. She's all over me about it. So I think it will become the norm, like you were saying. It absolutely will become the norm. Just a comment from me.
Any other questions from around the room? If there aren't, I would suggest that everyone get a drink and we can chat further after. Thank you very much to UKAA. Thank you very much to Get Living, and thank you all for coming.